Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take you back in time. I want to take you back to your first year in law school. I hear the groans. It gets worse. I want you to picture in your mind's eye the front of your law school building. And I want you to see yourself walking into that door on the way to your first torts exam. Now, I want you to take a deep breath, because what I'm about to ask you to do sometimes fills people with fear and trepidation. I want you to picture the face of your first torts professor. You can do it. I know it's scary. You can do it. Mine was a guy named Joe King. Joe King was a short, wiry guy with a shock of white hair on top of his head. He had half glasses, and he would peer down at us from the professor's dais, and in his deep, resonant voice would impress upon us continually how little we knew and how much more we needed to know. Now, how many of you had a law school professor who would bust your chops if you didn't read the footnotes? Nobody? Really? Wow. Well, this was Joe King. Any excuse to bring us down to the level and I guess theoretically motivate us to learn more, he would take. So, for Joe King's torts exam, I was on a mission. I was going to identify every issue he could throw at me, whether it was significant and obvious or completely obscure and he didn't even see it himself. I was going to identify all those things and I was going to wax eloquent on both sides of the issue. I was going to show Joe King exactly how much I knew. Now, I want to stop our story there for just a minute and put a label on that mindset. And Fred has just touched on this wonderfully, I think. I call it the law school illusion. And that's the notion that practicing law is all about technical competence. It's all about how much law you know and making a showy display of how much law you know. Now, throughout our law school careers, did anything disabuse us of that notion? Quite the contrary, absolutely not. Basically, it's drilled into our head for 3 years, course after course, paper after paper, exam after exam. It's all about how much you know. So then we finish law school. Then what happens? Bar exam. What is the bar? Yeah, that's next. We're getting there. Bar exam. And what is the bar exam designed to measure? Understandably, our technical competence in the practice of law. And then what happens? Or landing in-house, or some combination of both. And during those initial years, we're on Fred's first level. You remember that slide just a few minutes ago? And what is the first level? It's all about technical competence. And then for many of us, we go to a seminar in New York and we hear a speaker like Fred Krebs, and we suddenly realize that there are many more pieces to this puzzle. It's not all about the stuff that's over here that we learned in law school. It's about much, much more. And what I want to talk with you this afternoon is about one of those pieces of the other pieces of the puzzle. A very important concept, and again, Fred is just a great opening act. I mean, I feel like he's just feeding me lines, but for emotional intelligence. Now, what we're going to do today as we talk about emotional intelligence is we're going to talk about 3 things, and I want to give you a preview of our coming attractions. And here's what they are. First, we're going to talk about the various formulations of emotional intelligence, both traditional and something that's a little less traditional that frankly is my own personal perspective. And just to make it interesting and make sure I keep you focused, since I have you at almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon and the bar is waiting within about an hour, We're going to do this in the context of a game show. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, there are prizes. More to come on that. Then we're going to talk about something that is a unique obstacle to us as lawyers for developing our emotional intelligence, and that's something called the lawyer personality. I'm afraid all of us are going to see ourselves some of the unflattering characteristics that we bring to the table in our profession. We bring a lot of positives to the table, but we got a little baggage just between us friends, and we're going to talk about that as a barrier to developing our emotional intelligence. And finally, we're going to go to EQ applied. I call it the EQ gym. We're going to be talking about what I think is the core of developing this critical competency, and that is our attitudes and our assumptions. And we're going to take wisdom from three well-known books that have some terrific things to tell us about. So let's begin with the classic formulation of emotional intelligence. Many of you have probably heard of Daniel Goleman's book from the 90s called Emotional Intelligence. And there are many others have come along since then too. And usually they're focused on these four core areas. And fundamentally what they're talking about is, first of all, do we know what we're feeling at any particular moment? Believe it or not, many studies indicate that we really don't. We're feeling a sense of discomfort or sensations in our bodies, but we don't necessarily know exactly what we're feeling. Once we identify the emotion we're feeling, the challenge becomes, are we going to express it or not? And if we're going to express it, what is the appropriate way to express that emotion? And then there's the other side of things, and that's the relationship side of things. Are we managing our relationships? Are we trying to deepen and developing those professional relationships that are key to our professional success, or at a minimum not impairing them? And do we have the ability to read a room, to read the dynamic of a meeting, and intuitively respond in situations by modifying our behavior accordingly? Now that's the traditional formulation. Now we're going to come at this a little bit differently. Now I've spent the last several years reading about emotional intelligence and other topics. I know, I need to get out more, but anyway, that's what I've done, and I want to share with you my observations, because I think although the formulation that you've just seen is hugely valuable, and you need to get your arms around it, but I'm a recovering litigator, give me a break, so I've got to boil it down to its simplest level. And I think we can go even simpler, make it even simpler than the formulation that you've just seen. So what I have done is I've identified 4 personality attributes that I think underlie almost every aspect of emotional intelligence. And what we're going to do, we're going to talk about those attributes. I call them, by the way, the foundational attributes. We're going to talk about them in the context of a game show. Now, I'm getting a lot of looks like, what are you talking about? Well, here's what I'm talking about. I am the general counsel of a national jewelry retailer. And to keep you focused, since I'm competing with Happy Hour, I have some pretty nice bling right here. So here's what we're going to do. For each of the 4 foundational attributes, I have identified one celebrity who is either a really good example, and here's the name of our game show, by the way, EQ, A, and F. The really good examples get an A. The really bad examples get an F. It's going to be your job to guess who they are. Now, I have given this talk several times before, and I have found that lawyers are a bit of a competitive bunch, and when there's jewelry at stake, things can get a little rowdy. So what I need for you all to do is, when you know the answer, raise your hand. Amy is going to be assisting me, and she is going to walk over to the person who I point to. Oh, and Roz is in the back. Thank you, Roz. They're going to be assisting me because I'm going to have to point to one person as the person to give the answer. And if you just shout it out, I'm sorry, you are automatically disqualified. All right? So without further ado, let's launch into emotional intelligence A and F. Our first celebrity and our first foundational attribute. Now, this celebrity is very New York appropriate. I mean, you got to consider your audience, right? So this guy first rose to national prominence in the 1960s and 70s as a member of one of the legendary New York Knicks teams. He played with players like Willis Reed and Bill Bradley and Clyde Frazier. I'm getting a lot of looks like, who? I know some of you know who I'm talking about. He then became a national. I'm really surprised I haven't given it away yet. Do I have a taker? Amy?
Bill Bradley.
Bill Bradley? No.
Phil Jackson.
Very good. Tell us what your name is, sir.
Lou Macchiato.
Lou, and where do you practice?
I practice in Rothsville, New York. I used to be in-house. I'm now on the dark side of the former chair of ACC.
Well, Lou, congratulations.
I donated back. For the next, I'll take it.
Good, Lou, come on! You know, if you forgot Mother's Day, I mean, come on, I can help you out. Lou, you have won some Tanzanite earrings. Thank you very much, and congratulations. Usually I have to give a lot more clues than that, but this is, like I said, it's a New York-centric example. So anyway, what does Phil Jackson have to teach us about emotional intelligence? Now, Phil Jackson has written several books about his years in the NBA and even before. And it's clear what he does with his teams. Not surprisingly, he teaches his teams about basketball-related things. He's a basketball coach. He teaches them about a system of offense called the triangle. He teaches them about the value and importance of aggressive defense. He also teaches them about certain plays to run in specific situations, although he's not a great believer in that. He just wants the game to flow. But Phil Jackson was one of the first coaches who really went beyond that and taught his teams about some of the mental aspects of the game. And one of the things he taught them about was the value of being present. We're going to hear a little bit about that from our third speaker, Scott, I think. The value of being where you are and what you are, and involved in what you were doing. Now you may be thinking, well, that's great. On a basketball court, you've got professional athletes, some of the best in the world, moving at the speed of light. Of course they're going to have to be present. But think about how we can apply this to our lives as in-house lawyers. And let me give you an example to bring this home. This is your schedule this coming Monday at 9 o'clock. You have a meeting with your COO about a new product launch. At 10 o'clock, you have a meeting with your Senior Vice President for Human Resources. She is very cryptic about what the meeting is going to be about. My HR team can be very dramatic at times. So she says that she has a very significant employee issue, very significant employee issue, but won't tell you anything else. Then, last but not least, you have your CEO teed up at 11 o'clock on Monday morning, and she wants to talk with you about a restructuring of your legal department. And you're thinking, what in the heck does that involve? And you're thinking it may not be any news that you really want to hear. So that is your Monday morning, dealing with some of the key people in the C-suite. So you go to the meeting at 9 o'clock. You are ready to go. You are focused. You are taking in all the information you can about this new product launch. And your wheels are beginning to turn. Your analytical wheels are turning. You're thinking about all the questions that are brought to bear because of the new product launch. Then you go into your meeting with your Senior Vice President of Human Resources. And about 10 minutes into that meeting, you find that your attention is divided. 1/3 of your mind is back considering the new issues from the COO. Another third of you is trying to pay attention to what your Senior Vice President for Human Resources is telling you. And I'm seeing nods of the head in here. I think people can identify with this. And the other third is thinking about, what in the heck is my CEO going to talk to me about with this restructuring of my legal department? Now, my question to you is, does the Senior Vice President for Human Resources notice? I'd suggest, I see some yeses and some nos. I'll tell you in my experience, the answer is almost always yes. And if it doesn't happen then, it'll happen later. And so what I want to suggest to you is that a skill set that you need to develop is in those situations to develop a way to bring yourself back into the moment and be where you are and focus on what you are doing. Now, there are many suggestions about how to do this, and I don't pretend to give you all of the answers. But I'll give you an approach that I sometimes use that has been suggested by several notable authors, one a sports psychologist, one an expert on charisma, who we're going to talk about later. And that is, when you have a break between those meetings, take a minute, just a minute, and find a spot where you can breathe deeply, slowly exhale. And the recommendation that the charisma expert gives us is to concentrate on your toes. Bring yourself back into your body. Bring yourself back into the moment. There are any number of other ways that you can do that. I've modified that approach a little bit to, instead of my toes, concentrate on the soles of my feet, which, by the way, I'm doing right now. Our next celebrity, also an A+. This celebrity is a rapper. Began his career as Puff Daddy. Then became, I see a hand? Yes? Yes, in the black?
With the pink?
Yes.
Sean Combs.
Excellent, you are correct. What's your name?
Rachel Park.
Rachel, and what company are you with?
Medical Forefront.
Well, congratulations, you have won a black spinel bracelet, a beautiful black gemstone that is very popular these days. Congratulations. So what does Sean Combs have to teach us about emotional intelligence? Sean Combs, the rapper. Well, at a recent commencement address, about a year ago, actually, he was the featured speaker. He looked at his audience, out at his audience, and said this: I don't want you to be the next Obama. I don't want you to be the next Oprah. I don't even want you to be the next me. I want you to be you. Now think about that. What is he talking about? He's talking about the importance of being authentic, of being who we are and comfortable in our own skin. Now, what could cause us to not do that? I mean, why is that so hard? Well, I think the answer for many of us comes from a book, Lean In, written by Sheryl Sandberg. Has anybody read that book? Sheryl Sandberg talks about her struggles with what she calls the imposter syndrome, the notion that as skilled as she is, as smart as she is, as hardworking as she is, part of her doesn't believe she really belongs at the table. Now, as it turns out, Sheryl Sandberg is not alone. Olivia Fox Cabane, who wrote the book The Charisma Myth, regularly speaks to the incoming class at Stanford Business School. And what she says is she will always ask them, how many of you believe that you are the one mistake the admissions committee made? And believe it or not, 2/3 of the class regularly raises their hands. So what does that cause us to do? What it causes us to do is not trust who we are, but try to mimic somebody else, to identify people in the organization whose behavior seems to be working for them and assume it's going to work for us. And I will tell you, I just don't think that works long term, ladies and gentlemen. It also takes a lot of energy. And more importantly, it deprives your organization of the things that make you uniquely you. Your experience, your life history, your journey, what you've learned. And only you can provide that perspective. So dealing with the imposter syndrome is a big question. But I want to leave you with this one basic thought. If this is something that you wrestle with, make a commitment to show just a little bit more of yourself in your daily work so that you can make the unique contribution that only you can make. All right. Yes, our next celebrity is an A, but there will be an F. I promise there will be an F. Now, you're all going to know the answer to this one, so I'm going to have to string the clues out a little bit. She's from Detroit, singer, rhythm and blues. I'm sorry? She's so good. Aretha Franklin, that's correct. Can you tell us your name?
Yes, Niobe Christopoulou, and I'm with Libra Group.
Let's see what we have for you. We have an amethyst bracelet for you, a beautiful purple gemstone. Now, I didn't think it happened that fast. We obviously have a real music fan here. So what does Aretha Franklin have to teach us about emotional intelligence? Well, what's her best known song? You know it. I want you to pause for a minute and hear the melody in your head. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Now, to me, respect is a two-sided coin. One side is respect for others. And I look around this room at a room full of great professionals, and I think we got that down. We respect the time of others. We're responsive to our business partners. We give true effort to give the best results we possibly can get. What I want to talk with you about today and emphasize is the flip side of that coin, and that is respect for self and the foundations that we create for our lives. And I know in a city like New York, and given the diversity of businesses that you're involved in, you will deal with this question probably more than maybe anybody else in the country. And that is, when we talk about the foundations for our lives, we are going to be making decisions that are either conscious or unconscious about how they're going to be structured. Do we, for example, either consciously or unconsciously, never get enough sleep? Live on caffeine and junk food. And I love coffee as much as the next person, trust me. But if that's our diet, that's a bit problematic over a long term. Never even think about the word exercise. And perhaps most importantly, always give the people who are most important to us the short end of the straw. Now, we all know that there are going to be short sprints, and some of those things are going to suffer from time to time. But if the foundation for our lives is based on all of those things, or not observing all of those things on a long-term basis, we will begin to fray around the edges. And other people are going to begin to notice, and our effectiveness is going to be impaired. Again, this is a big topic, not something we can solve today. But what I would like to leave you with is simply a challenge, and that is, of those 4 areas that I talked about, which of them can you make a subtle change in to improve the foundation of your life? All right, I told you, I promised. There's an F here, and the F's kind of the most fun, almost away, of course. I'm sure you're not surprised. Now, I will tell you that at the ACC annual meeting, when I gave a version of this talk, the singer we're going to talk about stumped the band. I think basically 20% of the people in the room knew the answer. But I know. I am now in New York City. I am with a very hip group of in-house counsel. So you guys are going to do a lot better than 20%. I am sure. So here are your clues. She moved to the United States from Australia. She moved when she was 16. We have a hand in the back. Roz, can you go?
Iggy Azalea.
Oh my word, this is a sharp crowd. That is exactly correct. And tell us your name and what company you're with, please.
My name is Reginald, and I didn't know that answer. I'm not fessing up to knowing that answer. Britland Burns at MetLife.
Well, regardless of who knew the answer, I'll let you divide up the spoils. There is an... I'm sorry? She's getting the basketball. All right, well, what I'm going to give to somebody, I'm not quite sure who now, is a set of opal earrings and pendant. And you all can even divide them up if you like. Congratulations. Thank you very much. So what does Iggy Azalea have to teach us about emotional intelligence? Well, what we're going to talk about is one of her recent hit songs, a song called Fancy. How many of you have heard this song? I have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, and it seems like I heard this every minute of every day for approximately 6 months. Now, how many of you know the words to Fancy? Well, we're going to play a version for you in just a minute. But let me sum them up for you. The words are basically this. I am so awesome. Look at me. Don't you wish you were me? And don't you feel terrible because you are not me? Now, for your sound clip, for those of you who have not heard this song, I have a confession to make. I am a Jimmy Fallon lip sync addict. Sorry, but I had to come clean with you. How many of you have watched a Jimmy Fallon lip sync? When I have a bad day and I need a laugh, I go on YouTube and I search for Jimmy Fallon lip sync. So, Jimmy Fallon is going to help me out. And he's going to, James, would you cue this, please? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you could tell that was a newly modified version of Jimmy Fallon lip sync. I think he was doing the robot or something. I haven't quite figured it out. Anyway, you get a gist about what the song is all about. What does this song lack? Any sense of empathy. I mean, it's all about me. It's all about how amazing I am and asking the world to mirror back her wonderfulness. I mean, really? Now, I don't want to pretend that emotional intelligence is not about us or about you or about me. It clearly is. I mean, we're managing ourselves. We're in touch with our own emotions. I mean, that's about us, clearly. But it's not just about us. I mean, if we apply the law school illusion and the first level that Fred has talked about to our daily lives as in-house lawyers, all we're going to be doing is showing off how much law we know, whether our business partners really want to know that much law or not. That is not putting ourselves in their shoes. That is not providing cogent legal advice that they need. We need to put ourselves in their shoes, guide them, help them reach the right decision, and be the valued business partner that Fred described in his remarks. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our game show. Thank you very much for participating, and that's the end of part 1. Now part 2, this is the tough stuff, where we get to talk about ourselves as lawyers and the stuff about the lawyer personality that isn't necessarily fun to see. So I got curious about this and did some research, and there's a law firm consulting firm that deals with law departments too, called Altman Weil. I'm sure most of all of you have heard of them. Many years ago, they did a study about successful law firm lawyers, and here's what they found. Not really a very flattering picture. My personal favorite of this is, well, you know what, let's back up. What I want to do before we talk about those statistics is I want to show you, and I hope this video works better than the last one, I want to show you what it's like to manage lawyers. Now, in my previous life, I was a manager of a law firm office. I managed 2 multi-office practice groups. I was on the firm board. I got a feeling for what it's like to manage lawyers, and now I'm managing them in a different context. And rather than describe to you what it's like to manage lawyers, I want to show you, and I want to use one of my favorite Super Bowl commercials of all time. I don't think I could have said it any better than that. Now, why is that the case? Now we're back to the Altman Weil study. My personal favorite number here for successful law firm lawyers, 4 times less sociable than the general public. Is that even possible? I mean, really, think about it. Very high skepticism. Skepticism is literally almost off the charts. And then a lot of negativity. Some people who have written about lawyers said that if the Titanic had been filled with lawyers, that instead of searching for lifeboats, the lawyers all would have been on deck going, "We're going to die." So it got me curious. Law firm lawyers are one way, my theory. In-house lawyers are another way. And I would have painted a much more flattering picture of in-house lawyers based on my experience. And well, maybe not. About 3 years ago, there was a docket article in the ACC magazine, The Docket, An international legal department did a survey of all of its lawyers, tested their personalities to find out what the commonalities were. They got curious about the same thing I was. Are law firm lawyers the same way as in-house lawyers? And the answer is no, but it isn't always in a very positive way. Now, by comparison, in-house lawyers are less skeptical, although still very skeptical in relation to the general public. We're more sociable. I can tell that from being in this crowd today. But, and this was the surprising part, at least in this legal department, a high ego drive, higher than law firm lawyers. Really? And less empathetic than law firm lawyers. Now, I might argue with that a little bit around the margins, but I wanted to share with you is there is a certain commonality as we try to get our arms around something like emotional intelligence or perhaps even mindfulness, as Scott is going to talk about.
That's articles in the resources in my
Okay,
in the back.
wonderful. So Fred has preceded me yet again with a great point, that article that talks about the studies in Fred's materials. Thank you, Fred, for pointing that out. So what do we do with that? How do we overcome this bias against things that we can't analyze to pieces and that don't involve legal principles? I think we got to appeal to the other side of ourselves as lawyers, and we need to look for evidence. Now, I'm going to tell you, we're about to go to the emotional intelligence gym. I know you all are very excited about that this late in the day. But we're going to do a little bit of working out and take some wisdom from 3 particular books. These books have a lot to tell us, and what I want to focus on, this is a big topic, but I want to give you some takeaways. And the takeaways are the importance of your attitudes and the importance of your assumptions. Let's first talk about the charisma myth. I told you about this one earlier. This is the woman who regularly lectures to Stanford Business School and surveys them informally about the imposter syndrome, Olivia Fox Cabane. She's essentially invented the field of charisma consulting and she gives speeches, she consults and coaches CEOs in the Fortune 500. What she talks about is something that I think is fundamental to emotional intelligence, the concept of our attitudes and the signals that they cause us to send out. Now, many people, myself included at various points in my career, have believed, I can manage all this stuff in my head. I mean, I can sit the right way, right body language. I can make sure my arms aren't crossed or they are at the appropriate time. I can regulate my tone of voice. I can smile when I need to smile. And what Cabane basically says is that's baloney. Her theory is that you are sending off so many signals, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute, so many signals that you can't possibly control them all. And her theory is that you control them through your attitudes, which she calls charismatic mental states. So, for example, we're going to go back to your busy Monday morning. You remember that? You had your 9 o'clock with your COO, your 10 o'clock with your Senior Vice President for Human Resources, your 11 o'clock with your CEO. We're going to add a twist to that before that. My previous example assumed your morning went completely smoothly, but we all know that really doesn't happen. Taking a page from the headlines of my life, I have a teenage daughter who is addicted to social media. She basically walks around like this. When she's interacting with her friends, say one's having an overnight, they sit on the couch and they text each other across the couch. Sometimes we have to have electronics holidays at our house and impress on her that there are other things in life. And we always get the same reaction. Oh, Dad, but it's so unfair and none of the other parents do this and you're so mean. Well, imagine before on the day when you're having this major league group of meetings with the folks in the C-suite, that's the conversation at the breakfast table. And you leave the house and take your daughter to school. And the conversation has gone from, oh, Dad, it's so unfair, to ice cold silence. You drop her off at school, and then you go to work. And you're mad, and you're irritated. And, this could come from any number of things. Somebody cuts you off in traffic. I mean, there are any number of things that can mess up your day when the day is really important. So how do you get yourself ready for that 9 o'clock meeting with your CEO? Well, it kind of goes back to what we talked about before. Taking a few minutes, getting yourself grounded, getting yourself present, and getting yourself focused on the meeting to come. Maybe even spending a few minutes visualizing yourself being effective. That's what great athletes do. Why shouldn't we? In short, that's the theory that Olivia Smith-Cobain has. To get the right output from yourself, you can't control it all consciously. You've got to work on your attitudes. So, book number 2, another very New York appropriate reference, Malcolm Gladwell, frequent contributor to the New Yorker magazine. How many have you read one of his books? Wow, that's terrific. One of my favorite authors. I can't get enough of his books. Well, he takes this notion of the signals that we send off to the next level. And interestingly enough, this book, for those of you who've read it, is not about emotional intelligence, but it has something important to tell us. And what Malcolm Gladwell discusses is the research of a psychologist named John Gottman in Washington. And what he does, he analyzes the dynamics of married couples. And what he does is he and his team record married couples. They come in and discuss a topic that is mildly contentious. Maybe they have a little bit of a dispute about whether they like or don't like a dog, for example. His team records what happens, and then they parse every detail. Tone of voice, body language, is there any rolling of the eyes going on? The countless details that people give off in an encounter. Gladwell calls that thin slicing. And what happens is John Gottman and his team have gotten so good at thin slicing all of these countless signals that we give off that they can, after analyzing an interaction of a married couple for 50 minutes, determine whether 15 years from now they will still remain married with 95% certainty. So the thought that I want to leave you all with from this book is everybody is thin slicing everybody else all the time. You're doing it with me right now. You're going to do it with people who you encounter tomorrow, and so will I. We all do it because we are subconsciously processing all of these signals and coming up with conclusions, rightly or wrongly, based on the subconscious processing of those. We'll reach conclusions before we even consciously know that we do. So again, one of the key things that I want to leave with you is a lot of that is determined by what your attitudes are at the time. For example, let's go back to your Monday morning. If you walk into that meeting with your COO mad and irritated, if expressions cross your face, as they inevitably might when you think about how mad you are at your daughter, is the CEO going to know about your daughter? The CEO is going to read that as a reaction to what he's telling you. So we, to be truly effective, need to be dealing with our attitudes. Now let's talk about our assumptions. This book is called Own the Room by Amy Sue and Muriel Wilkins. And what they talk about here in the first several chapters is a situation where they create these characters based on client attributes. One they talk about is very focused on saying yes to everything, accommodating everyone, is really focused on treating his team well, but doesn't necessarily meet his goals all the time. The other is the opposite. A woman, for example, they paint as driven by the bottom line. Doesn't really care about the effect on her team. Doesn't really think about what it means if she dresses him down in front of the other team members. Her focus is all about the bottom line. And what they posit is that that is all based on the assumptions that these people bring to the table of what their roles are. And what they suggest is that you find a signature voice, which is the combination of a voice for others and a voice for self. Now, there's not enough time for me to go into this in greater depth, but I want to plant that idea in your minds. And this is a book that I commend to you because they talk about ways to do that. And one of the fundamental ways that they suggest is to deal with your assumptions. To take it down to a more basic level, do you assume that you are a guide for your business partners? Or do you assume that you should be basically waiting for someone to knock on your door and ask you to resolve a legal problem? Your assumptions will gauge how you react, and it will tend to determine how you interact with the other members of the business team. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm about out of time. I have really enjoyed spending time with you here today. In your materials is an article that I have written for the docket, which will be published in July or August, that discusses EQ workouts. I guess I'm obsessed with this EQ gym thing. And it goes into greater depth about all these steps. And it's designed so that if you will dedicate 15 minutes a day for 60 days, you will significantly increase your emotional intelligence and I hope your effectiveness on your jobs. So, with that final disclaimer, I thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure being with you. I'm glad to answer any questions. Questions? Okay. Scott? Oh, is there?
Can you talk just a little bit about devices in meetings and iPads and iPhones and not only, I would think, using them yourself cuts down on emotional intelligence, but how to, if there's anything to do when you are with a group where you've got either somebody you report to or people in your C-suite on their devices so that you can't make the connections.
I think that's a great question. I have a couple comments. One, I'm sorry, absolutely. She asked, and help me understand if I'm stating your question right. She's basically asking about the impact of electronic devices in meetings. We're all tempted to get on them if the meeting gets a little slow, or even if we just feel like we have urgent things to do. Other team members often do the same thing. And the question is, how should we regulate that, I think? And I'd suggest two things to you. One, if you're on your iPad, if you're on your phone, and you will have to be to some extent, you're sending a signal to your team members that what's being talked about is really not as important as all the other stuff on your plate. And I don't think that's a message that you want to send. Second, I think it's going to impair your ability to be present. You can't be absorbing the information that's coming to you in the meeting if you are on an iPad or an electronic device the whole time. Now, this is hard. I mean, I don't pretend that it's not hard, but I have tried. We have a 3-hour business meeting every Tuesday from noon to 3. And I try very hard, not always successful, but I try very hard to look every speaker in the eye as long as they present. When there's a break in the action, I may glance down and try to catch up and see if there's an important email, if I have an important call that's been returned. But I try to minimize that. Now, admittedly, that is a work in progress for me, but my suggestion for you on that would be minimize. Minimize the amount of time you do that. Yes?
Thanks. I think a follow-up, and maybe what I heard in the question also was, is there anything you can do about getting the attention of other people who are in their handheld devices?
Now that's more challenging. I'll tell you, and this is easier said than done, but I think a lot of it has to do with really trying to make your presentation as focused and cogent as possible. If it goes long, our attention spans get worse and worse with time. And if it goes long, if it's too wordy, if your slides are packed with text, I think you tend to lose an audience. I think people are much more attuned to images, to short, pithy information on slides than a slide that's packed with data or words. And to me, it's like if it's overly long and you've got slides packed with data, you're probably going to lose your audience. And so I think it's more a matter of crafting your presentation in a way that's going to command their attention. And every now and then you might use devices like having a game show and giving away jewelry to make sure they stay focused. I mean, there are things that you can do to be creative about it too. Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.